Hello, people of God. It's Pastor Stephen, and this is a virtual Bible study being recorded on Wednesday, a little bit after 1 o'clock. And I'm joined by Linda Okunowski. You can wave, Linda. And by Marlene Beatty. And so I know later on there's going to be a consistory meeting tonight. We're looking forward to that. And I also know that if you missed this and if you're interested, Carrie Kuhn hosts a Bible study at 6:30 on Wednesday. So for consistory members, that might not work, but for some of you, you might be able to check that out. I've selected for the text today a passage from 1 Peter 2, and it's my preaching text for this Sunday. The lectionary suggests a gospel passage, a New Testament passage, a psalm, and a history passage, which usually means Old Testament, but sometimes means Acts. And so I usually choose from one of them, and I've chosen this one. And a little bit of background on Peter. So we think this was written around 62 or 60 to 64 AD, and we know Jesus was crucified around 30. So this is 30 years into the church developing, and now it's faced a lot of persecution, first in Jerusalem from fellow Jews, and then from the Roman Empire. And in fact, Peter himself will become a martyr at the hands of the Romans under Nero. And so he's writing to Christians that have felt persecution and they're going through a hard time. We're not being persecuted per se, but we're going through a hard time. So I think there could be some encouragement for us from Peter. And so we're opening up to chapter 2, verse 2. And Linda, would you read just the first two verses? That would be 2 and 3.
Like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good.
Thank you. And I love, Linda, that when we did the Bible study on Psalm 23 last week, we talked about the images, like thinking, how would you think as a sheep? And you're like, I'd never thought of it that way. So Peter here is using a metaphor, and he's talking about spiritual stuff, but his metaphor is milk and babies. So does that bring any associations up for either of you?
Babies need milk to survive.
Yeah, and he wants you to crave it, crave this milk, just like newborn babies, but he's talking about spiritual milk. And so you can grow up in your salvation now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. Does that taste that the Lord is good, does that sound familiar at all? He's actually hinting toward one of the Psalms that says, taste and see that the Lord is good. All right, so be a baby about it, and crave the milk. Now he's going to move on to another metaphor. Marlene, would you read, let's say, verses 4 and 5?
As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by men but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Thank
you. So he's left the milk part behind. Now he's talking about stones and rocks and cornerstones, and that he's the living stone. Do you remember what Peter's real name was, or his given name, before Jesus gave him a different name? Simon, and sometimes we call him Simon Peter. And he called him Peter right when he said something. Jesus was asking what people say about him, and it was Peter that said, do you remember anything about what he said, either of you? He basically said, you're the Messiah. And he said, that's right. And on this rock I will build my kingdom, and talked about giving the keys to Peter. But he changed his name from Simon to Peter, and it would have been Petra in Greek. Do either of you know? I'm not expecting that you're going to know Greek words, but do you have an idea what Petra might mean? It's related to our word petrified.
The rock.
Yes.
Referred to as the rock, so I would assume it
giving him the name. He calls him Rocky in a way. So Rocky, if you're listening, this one's a good one for you. So Peter was called Rock, And now he's remembering Jesus is a cornerstone. And then he's saying, you're a living stone. So I love this. And he's taking his special name from Jesus and he's spinning it into a little bit more of an image here. And Linda, would you read on a little bit from there?
Where'd we leave off?
Verse 6.
Okay. Now, to you who believe, this
Verse
stone
6.
is...
Verse 6.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should turn on the light. For in Scripture it says, see, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame.
Thank you. Now, I believe you're using the NIV, which is what I have in front of me. So it sounded word for word the same. Is there something, now this is something I would do in confirmation class. Do you notice anything about the way the text lays out there? She's turning on the light.
Well, it's not in paragraph form.
Yeah, so it's indented a little bit differently from everything else. Any idea why that's indented? Do you notice that too, Linda, what I'm talking about?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you know why that is?
No.
It's
like a
quote.
Yes.
It's a quote.
Yes. And so at the end of it, there's a little footnote, B and Z. So you've looked over to the right, and since we're looking at
Isaiah,
verse 6,
from Isaiah.
Yes, he's quoting Isaiah 28:16, and so he's become quite a biblical scholar himself. And I believe, like I said in the sermon a couple of weeks ago, why would he know the Bible so well? It's because Jesus taught him this kind of stuff, and he's starting to put it together. And besides the 3 years he spent with Jesus, now it's 30 years after the crucifixion, or about that much. So he's had time to continue reading, and he sees all these things in the Old Testament that point to Jesus. And they were things that were just kind of laid out there or thrown out by the prophets, and they might have not been noticed very much for a while, but now he's having these eureka moments. This was talking about Jesus, that there was a stone that was rejected, but it became the chief cornerstone. So that's what Isaiah talked about. And I'm sure in his day, people didn't really get it or understand what that was talking about. But he's saying Jesus is the important rock, the one they almost threw out, or in fact, they did throw it out. They didn't think it was good. And I remember, I'll probably share this in the sermon, so it'll be a little redundant, but I remember the church building that I served in Hawaii had all these lava rocks that were all fit together, a little harder than bricks that are all the same shape. And I was told by a guy who had been an assistant when the church was being built, this little old Japanese American man came in and said, I helped build this church 50 years ago. And he told about how the master builder would be way up on the scaffolding, and he'd look down and say, get that rock, and this one, no, the one next to it. And so he'd bring it up because he knew that was the one that would fit. And at the end, there were a bunch of rocks that were just laying around that were not used, and they kind of piled them up in a wall near the church. In fact, I was a part of a project where we then built a mortared wall with those rocks 50 years later. And it was kind of fun to be a stonemason for a few days. But there were leftover rocks that were rejected. And I think that was a common thing in building. And Isaiah was speaking about that stone that people didn't even think was going to fit or was important. Now it is the chief cornerstone. There's a song about that, and Martha's asked me to sing it this Sunday, so we'll get to hear that as well. All right, so I've waxed eloquent about cornerstones and everything, but we know who he's talking about, right, Linda?
Yes.
Cornerstone was talking about Jesus. But then I love that he knows he's Peter. He knows Jesus is the cornerstone, but he's like, you're all cornerstones too. And I'm going to go to an image from one of my Quarren vlogs, if I can do this. There it is. Do you see it? Oh, now there it is. So do you remember when I stood in front of that? Does that show?
Yes.
Do you see the image? Okay. So this was done by Wendy Elser, and all along the border were these bricks, and our Sunday school students got to write their names on them to remind us that we're all being built together as stones with with Jesus as our cornerstone. All right. Do you have any? I've gone on a lot about verse 6. I think it's the key verse in this passage. Anyone notice anything or have any questions about it? Let's go on. Marlene, it's your turn to read.
Verse 7.
Verse 7, please. And 8.
Okay. Now to you who believe, this stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone, and a stone that causes men to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for.
Thank you. You know, I was going on to the rejected part. That wasn't actually in that first section from Isaiah, but this one from verse 7 comes from a Psalm, Psalm 118, and then the second part of it, the stone that causes people to stumble, that does come from Isaiah. All right, so he's mixing and matching some passages about stones, and we know about stumbling blocks or stumbling stones, and to me, this is very parallel to a lot of things that Jesus said about some people get it and some people don't. And if you get it, you know the blessing. And if you don't, it just is, it is a stumbling block for you. Does this give us any encouragement in a time of trouble?
I would say so, yes.
I think especially for those who are persecuted for believing Jesus, this gave them something to be rooted for. I'm looking for stuff in this quarantine that will give us a little bit of hope. And Marlene and I were talking today about some people that are getting more and more stir crazy, and this is hard for us. And I have moments where I feel like, yeah, I'm doing great, and there are other moments like I can't concentrate, I can't think, I just need to do something different for a while. But
I think that's all of us, don't you?
Yeah. Let's finish this out to verse 10. Linda, would you read some more? Or 9 and 10, please.
But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
You know, that verse number 9 could be a contender for the main part of this passage as well. There are 4 things. You are a chosen people, and just free association. Who's a chosen people? What do you think of with chosen people?
People chosen by God.
Chosen by God. So I think of the Jews. They knew they were the chosen people. There's kind of a Jewish joke. Well, why doesn't he choose someone else for a change or something? But because sometimes being the chosen people isn't easy. But so he's saying that we as believers in Christ are the chosen people. And the next metaphor was what?
A royal priesthood.
I love that because it packs 2 things in there. That any people that come to mind in the Bible with that phrase, royal priesthood.
Oh, the teachers of the law. Is that what you mean?
I was going to say David because he was royalty. And then I realized priesthood, he wasn't a priest. And he was really clear that he was not a priest. And there was one person way back in the Old Testament, Melchizedek, that came to, was it to Moses or Abraham? I can't remember. And his name actually means king, and he was a priest. But there was a time when Saul started to act like, well, I can just do this because I'm the king. And he got in big trouble with God because you are not a priest. You're not supposed to be making sacrifices or taking things that are made for sacrifices. So those 2 lines were kept very separate in Israel's history. You had the kings and you had the priests. And you didn't have a priest king or a king priest until Jesus. And so for us to be a royal priesthood, that's pretty amazing. So it connotes something of royalty. I remember where a phrase from the 70s or 80s where people said, I'm a kid of the king, or I'm a child of the king, or a son of the king, or a daughter of the king. Have you heard of that? Does that sound familiar, Marlene?
Mm.
Okay. And also the idea of being a priest. A priest was always the go-between to connect people with God. If we are a priesthood, what does that imply?
And that we are his disciples, or that we're taking his word.
Yes, and we help connect people with God. So we're royalty and we're priesthood. That's amazing. And thank you too so much for bearing with me. There are only two people and I ask hard questions, and it's easier when there are a bunch there, but thank you for sticking with this. So you're God's chosen people, a royal priesthood. The next one is what?
A holy nation.
Do you remember what the word holy technically means?
I should. I remember
It
you.
means set apart, set apart.
Yeah.
So when you say holy, 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 you are so above and set apart anything else. So to be holy people means you're a set apart people, a holy nation. And they lived in different nations. We think Peter might have been in Rome when he wrote this. And so, of course, they were aware of the Roman Empire, but to be a holy nation at the same time reminds me that this world is not my home. I belong to a different kingdom. And your translation was slightly different because I think you have a newer translation, Linda, from the NIV has gone through a couple editions, but what was the third one that you read there in verse 9?
Holy nation, and it was a people belonging to God.
So mine says God's special possession, and possession or belonging to, it's the same thing, but someone at some point thought maybe this is a better way to translate this. We're God's possession, we belong to God. So he, in that little verse, he packs in a lot of stuff about who we are. If you are being, not quarantined, but if you're being persecuted and hunted down, or you're scared for your life, and he's saying, you're a holy nation and you're a royal priesthood. I believe that would have given them some hope. We're not being chased down, at least not yet, for breaking quarantine. But this is quite a pep talk to be told how precious we are to God and who we are. And then that last verse, once you weren't a people, and now you are a people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. That to me is like Hebrew poetry. Do you remember what I said in our other Bible study about what Hebrew poetry doesn't rhyme sounds, it rhymes
Thoughts.
or ideas. And this is one where it's kind of like, it's not this, but it's the opposite. It's not that, but it's the other. And so he wrote that in a Hebrew poetry kind of style when he said, once you were not a people, now you are a people. Once you had not received mercy, now you have received mercy. All right. Well, as I look at this passage to preach on Sunday, does anyone have any thoughts on what applications might be? That's the hardest part for me. So I'm asking you to dig in and give me a little bit of feedback. What parts really speak to you or give you hope or comfort or encouragement?
Well, it says what many of the Bible passages we've been covering is that God is eternal, and we are his children, and he will guard us always. He will always be at our back. So how can you ever be really afraid?
We're not just forgotten orphans. He has something for us. Yeah.
I think every time I hear this passage, cornerstone always stands out to me, and I always vision the cornerstone on the corner of the church and the dates there of the various churches that stood on our property and all that we've been through, and that God was with us in all those times.
That's a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, I think I'm ready to sign off. Or I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to talk with you two a second more afterwards. But any closing thoughts? Well, God bless you all that are watching this a little bit later. And I hope you will be able to join us for the virtual worship at 10:30 on Sunday, where I'll be talking a little bit more about this passage. God bless you and goodbye.
Bye.